It's Dr. Bill Clark. So excited to be back for this kickoff season 4 of Beyond Limits, where spirit meets science. I intended this to be a live stream today, but ran into technical difficulties streaming to the platforms. All the ways to do that change. So we'll get back live here in a couple weeks, but this one will be pre-recorded. So, but again, that's something that I had planned, but didn't work out that way. So if you tried to tune in for the live stream early this morning, apologize for that. But here it is. I'll put it out on all the platforms and social media. This is the recording for that. Anyway, so again, this is season 4 for Beyond Limits, where spirit meets science, and I just want to welcome everybody back. It's been about 6 months, to be honest, but there's been a lot going on with building the new business, NutriSelect, but also finishing the second book, which I don't have with me here, but it's the next manuscript, which is The Way of the Conscious Leader, where spirit meets science. So all of season 4, over the next 20 episodes, which will take us into May of next year, will be taking us on that journey that mirrors the book journey, which is the hero's journey to conscious leadership. So I'm super excited about that. And how did that happen? How did that come to be? Well, it's an interesting story. So it was about a year ago, actually, that I was doing this podcast. The topic was on resilience, and within a 2 or 3 week period, I had several people contact me through LinkedIn or email or something, nobody that I knew, and just commented and said, "Hey, I heard your podcast. Can I? Have you thought about doing a business book?" One of them was a publisher, actually, and so I had thought about it before. In fact, I have several books in the works. If you've been to my website, you've seen what's coming. But it wasn't in my immediate radar. It was something down the road I thought about doing. So I spent some time going back, looking at my previous talks and podcasts for more than a decade. I have over 80 talks, as it turns out. Most of them are on audio that were recorded where I used to present with this one group back in Florida from about 2012 to 2017. And I've done podcasts since then. And so I hadn't really looked at doing that. But after I put everything together, compiled it, and kind of put together the outline and the chapters for the book, I got pretty excited about it. I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I had a lot of content to pull from, and that was all the transcripts, So thank God for today's technology that could extract, create the transcripts from the audios of talks I gave years ago. And then take that and then obviously become the material for the new book. So that's how that got started last year, okay? And I had, like I said, I had taken a step back from the podcast. I had kind of a program that I had outlined, and I was working through those topics. But really, since it was a year ago, I think the last podcast was in February this year, I was in parallel working on this new book. Also the new business and all that. So I came back and I said, okay, let's see what we can do for that. And I didn't really get started heavily writing it until later in the fall and into the holidays was dedicated to that, dedicated time to do that. And then I finished the manuscript in May. So right now we're just looking where it's going to get published. And I'll let you know as soon as we hear. Certainly on this podcast, we'll do that. Now, the point of why do this book? Okay, for years, I guess if you think about conscious leadership, you may or may not have heard that term before. So, conscious leadership is not something we understand intellectually. Eventually, life gives us the opportunity to embody it, and as we go through, and this is not your typical leadership business book, okay? It's not, when I think about the 5 parts in the book, the 18 chapters, the first 3 parts probably cover an arc that's similar to other conscious leadership books. However, parts 4 and 5 kind of take it one step further, and that's unique to my own journey itself as a scientist who had a spiritual awakening and been on that path, and also leading and starting my own companies for years. And that's kind of how that kind of set up this book in terms of doing something that was very unique. Now, I've had more than one publisher look at it, pretty excited about it, telling me there's, I think 3 different publishers told me there's not anything like this on the market, which is encouraging. And so that got me even more excited about this book, and thinking about what I could really bring to help people in terms of moving to that next level of embodying leadership, as I say. So it comes from living the material. I'm also preparing for my upcoming TEDx talk, which also comes from this book. The title of the talk is Integrity as a Frequency, so that comes from one of the chapters here. Actually a theme throughout the book, but it's also about navigating uncertainty, opportunity, setbacks, decisions, relationships, and leadership. So it's not typical in that sense. I've read many business books over the years myself as a business leader, but this is something that goes way beyond that. And that's what excites me about it and the most, because I've lived this through experience for decades. So why I wrote the book. First of all, if you talk about all the worlds that I inhabit as a scientist, an entrepreneur, a leader, and a spiritual seeker, and how to kind of these different identities of how to synthesize and bring them together. And what happens when we stop separating the measurable from the meaningful? That's a question for you. What happens when science and spirituality become complementary ways of understanding ourselves and leadership? So think about that for a moment. I think the simplest way to describe that, and that I've tried to explain to people, is that what does that mean, the spirit and science? I mean, I used to keep these kind of things separate in terms of my thinking and operation, but the reality is they're very much integrated. And that's where the friction came from trying to keep them separated throughout my life. So the idea was to synthesize and bring these together. And, you know, to minimize or eliminate that friction by doing that. So if you think about it, science, spirituality, etc., these are just perspectives of the same truth. It's a different way of looking at it. And I guess an analogous way to think about it is, as there are different religions that look at the same thing, it's based in the same truth. So it's much more simple when you think about it that way. So that's how the way the Conscious Leader, where spirit meets science, was born. And again, it's not a traditional leadership book. It's about this inner state from which leadership emerges. So what is a conscious leader? I'm challenging the conventional definition of leadership and what I wrote about in my book. You know, leadership is often measured externally by results or by authority, your title, influence, position, and performance. But conscious leadership begins internally. And there's 3 simple concepts that recur throughout the book that I want to touch on here. And of course, we're going to deep dive into all these through the next several episodes, next 20 episodes of this podcast. We'll deep dive in all of these. But the first is, and that roadmap is awareness. And we talk about being self-aware or being aware, but when you ask that question, to yourself and say, can I see myself clearly? My beliefs, my fears, my motivations, my energy, my ego, and my patterns. These are all part of what we think about when we think about awareness. Then comes alignment. So you have some beliefs, and some of those may be faulty beliefs. There's a whole chapter in the book that talks about beliefs. And things change as we evolve and grow spiritually and professionally and all of that, because what used to be the way we operated doesn't serve us anymore. And you feel that friction. You feel that it doesn't align anymore, it doesn't resonate. So that's where the alignment piece comes in. So if you think about your thoughts and your words and your values, the choices you make, and the actions that you take, are they really coherent to your beliefs and what you feel it should be? And that takes some deep soul searching inside yourself to identify that, to find that alignment. And what are we talking about in alignment there? We're talking about coherence. That's what it's really about, is finding that coherence. Once you have that alignment, then follows naturally action. Can I translate that inner alignment into some courageous action in the real world? How do I enter the arena and operate that way? It takes courage to do that, because once you get into an alignment with your thoughts and your values and your choices that resonate with you and what motivates you and your beliefs, you'll know your beliefs are true because you'll feel the alignment there as it resonates. And you'll see it clearly. And you'll be able to discern with a lot of practice whether or not those things are actually truly aligned. And you're not like pulling the wool over your own eyes and saying, yeah, this is what I really think. And it's like, but in your gut, it doesn't feel that way. So this takes a practice to develop that. And we'll talk about that journey through the book. In fact, think of the new book here as the hero's journey to conscious leadership. So by the time you arrive at the end of chapter 18, it's not that you know everything. You're just beginning your journey. You've become the Zen master or Jedi master that you understand all the different aspects of conscious leadership in a very deep way. However, you're at that point, then you're just beginning to put it all into action, really. Okay? And again, it's about translating that inner alignment into courageous action in the real world. So the thesis for season 4 then, behind The Way the Conscious Leader is talking about the future of leadership isn't about domination, control, or performance. It's coherence, as I was saying. New term for you, coherence. So you feel it. That's why I talk about my TEDx talk that's coming up, Integrity as a Frequency. There's a coherence to that in terms of alignment with what you're speaking about, what you've embodied as a leader. So, to clarify what we mean by coherence, it's when who you are, what you believe, what you say, and how you act begin to tell the same story. They have to be aligned. So again, it's who you are, what you believe, what you say, and how you act that begins to tell the same story. Okay, this is the coherence that we're looking for, that we want to move into. To get there, though, does take courage, and it does take time, because you're going to have to go through this journey, and you'll do this through the book. I hope that you'll buy the book and you'll do that when it gets published. But it'll take you through. There's exercises, leadership practices all throughout the book, science notes, spiritual insights that will help you, guide you on that journey to see wherever you are. So wherever you are on the journey, it doesn't matter. The book will show up for you wherever you are. Okay. And on that point, I have a little side story here. So the foreword for the book was written by Joe Vitale. Now, I don't know if everybody knows who Joe Vitale is. It depends. If you saw or read Rhonda Byrne's book from 2006 titled The Secret, then there was a movie that came out right after that, and you had people like Joe Vitale, Michael Beckwith, and so on, thought leaders about manifestation, all that. It got a lot of press at that time, and I happened to be in Austin, Texas in 2008. It was 18 years ago, and this past May, and it was a World Wellness Weekend, and it was right at the big hubbub and highlight of the movie out, and on the main stage, you had a lot of Marianne Williamson and Joe Vitale. You had a lot of well-known people speaking about that and the principles and concepts from that book. So I was standing in the cafeteria line on the expo floor, and I noticed that Joe Vitale was standing behind me. Of course, I knew who he was. He's famous. And I turned around and introduced myself, and then we just chatted for a little bit, and then he saw my badge. He said, "Oh, I see you're a speaker." And yeah, I wasn't a speaker on the main stage. I was in a breakout room doing the first time public speaking about where spirit meets science concept. And at that time, 18 years ago, I just had this concept for this book, which has certainly evolved and actually could not have been written 18 years ago. It really took till now, with all the experiences through my journey, to be able to write it effectively. But at the time, it was an idea for a book, and I had written, started on one chapter, and I had an outline for the book, and I described it to him about my journey and that sort of thing. And he said, "Well, that sounds interesting. How do I get a copy of that?" And I said, "I'll be glad to send you a copy when I actually write the book." So 18 years later, you can hear where the story's going. We had been connected on LinkedIn since then. I was writing in my acknowledgments all the different authors and people that influenced me in my journey. And of course, Joe Vitale was right at the list. And I identified that story in itself was the seed that planted for me to begin writing my books. I was journaling at that time, exploring the idea. I didn't think I really had it in me to write a book. I didn't know if I could do it. But his excitement about that really inspired me and planted that seed. And so I acknowledged that in my acknowledgments in the book. So when I reached out to him on LinkedIn, I said, "Hey," I told him the story, which was a very unique story. I thought maybe he'd pretty much remember that. I don't know. He talks to thousands of people in 18 years, I'm sure. 3 days later, he messaged me back, sent me his email address, said, "Email me a copy of your manuscript. I'll take a look at it." I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome." Okay. So I did that. And then 3 days after that, he came back to me and said, "The book is great," all caps. He said, "Send me a signed copy when it's published. Here's my forward." I was like, wow, now that's huge validation. I've spent months, really years in the making to build this book. So that's why I tell this story, because he actually says that in the forward, that no matter where you are in your journey or your path is going to align for wherever you are. You'll be able to pick it up from there. So that's why I tell that story. But think about that. That's for me, that was like, I'm honored and grateful that I've been able to get that endorsement from him, which is very, very cool. So really can't wait to get the book out there, because now I'm really motivated, because it's like, okay, somebody said my book was great. Okay, that knows this type of material, so this is a good thing. Anyway, so what's the journey ahead look like for season 4? So again, it's going to be 20 episodes scheduled bi-weekly. It'll be on Sundays, and that's generally the journey. And the book will moves through 5 broad territories. So the first is awakening. Okay, who am I? What and what paradigm am I operating within? So you'll be able to identify where you are in terms of that path as you start reading the material. And we'll go through this stepwise through this next 20 episode journey. The inner work, that's the second territory that we're going to explore. And that's where our beliefs, our fears, our wounds from our past, identities, we'll start looking at those and really looking within to see how they're actually leading us, okay? And that's really important, because I always say that the greatest journey you're ever going to take is the one within. And that inner work is critical before you can move into the leadership and action section, which is next. So again, identifying all these things, what are these faulty beliefs you may have about yourself, what others think about you? None of that matters. It really is. It comes down to what's true. And then the next theme is leadership in action. So how do we have the courage, the vulnerability, the expected, how we set expectations. In other words, I'm going to talk about expectancy versus being expectant. That's two different things. And how do we change how we show up in the arena? And that means the arena of life, in business and personal life, whatever. Because we're not just talking about leader in business, or you're leaders in family, maybe you are leaders in Boy Scout troops or Girl Scout troops or whatever, or communities that you work at, your community or your church or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter, because leadership is leadership. And so how we show up is based on that inner work we've done and how we take action and have the courage to do that. And that leads us into the energetics of leadership. So how do abundance and love and vision and energy and the presence influence how we lead? We'll spend a few chapters on the energetics of leadership. And then integration and transformation. This is in the last part. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention in the first part, awakening, a big piece of that is curiosity. So where does it start? It starts at the beginning for me, and I'll share some of my stories in there. So there's part memoir throughout the book in terms of experiences that I've had in business, personal, that sort of thing, from the time I was a boy. So this integration and transformation is the last part. And so it's like, how does the science, spirituality, intuition, purpose, and service become one way of being? That's huge. Now, you're going to want to jump ahead and get to integration and transformation. They go, all right, how do I do that? But I'm going to encourage you to stay grounded and move through the journey, through those parts there, to see where it meets you on your journey. And see, because you're going to identify things you haven't thought of or you didn't see before you ever get to this integration and transformation. That's what's different about other conscious leadership books. The energetics of leadership and the integration and transformation. Parts 4 and 5 of the book is where it kind of digresses into something else, more broader in terms, or I shouldn't say digress, goes deeper is really what it does. It goes deeper into that. So over the coming months, we're going to explore these questions together, not as abstract philosophy, but through science and stories, and I'll share some of that from that, and probably some additional ones that aren't in the book, practices, conversations, and lived experience. Okay, this is really important. That's what it's going to feel like for season 4, and you don't need a syllabus for this. You can take the journey with it. I can't tell you when the book's going to be published exactly yet. It has to go through one final editing, and then it'll come out before then. But somewhere during this journey that we're taking on the podcast, the book will be published, okay? So here's a question for you as a listener, and that is, before we take this journey together, I want you to ask yourself one question. Who is leading my life right now? Ask yourself, who is leading my life? And meaning your life. Who's leading your life right now? And then you're going to want to unpack that slowly and really start to evaluate where you are on this path. Is it the authentic version of you? Or are you full of fear? Is it fear? Full of expectations, maybe? Or it's an identity that you've been living that you've outgrown, that no longer serves you? Or is it the need for approval? Or the need for certainty? Or perhaps it's a version of yourself that once protected you, but no longer represents who you're becoming. So think about those questions there, and you can start this dialogue with yourself as we start diving into it in our next podcast. And just become aware of those things. Don't try to fix anything, just notice it, just bring it into your awareness. That's the first movement of conscious leadership, is to bring it into your awareness. And then you're going to ask, if I were leading from the deepest truth of who I am, what might I do differently? Let me say that again. If I were leading from the deepest truth of who I am, what might I do differently? That's going to be your first practice. So you can start sitting with that now and start exploring that. So beyond leadership, beyond limits in this case, and beyond leadership, it's not about titles. We tend to think of that in a traditional business sense or that sort of thing. So, like I said, this is not the season. It isn't only for CEOs or executives, is what I'm trying to say, but for families or businesses, teams, communities, and ourselves, right? And you don't need a title to be a leader. Every time your inner state influences another human being, you're leading. I'm leading by doing this podcast. And this ties back to last season's Beyond Limits, which was last year, which was about exploring integrity and belief and transformation and leadership energy. So again, conscious leadership begins with self-leadership, and then it transmits outward. I want to close with an invitation. Okay, so the title of this episode is Beyond Limits, the way the conscious leader, a new chapter begins. Okay, so that's the title of this episode. We're starting a new journey. And I called it that because that's exactly what it feels like. You know, for me, it's for the podcast, the book, what's happening with the business, and personally as well. All these things are kind of coming together in a unified way at this time. So it's a perfect timing for me personally of presenting all this material from the book. And it sets up, because everything's connected, it's not separate, but it's going to set up everything that's coming over the next coming months into next year, actually. I don't have every answer, okay? And that's never been what Beyond Limits is about. It's about taking that journey and exploring, being curious. It's staying curious, staying curious enough to ask better questions and courageous enough to follow where those questions lead. Because it takes courage to change. Now, change is inevitable. Suffering is optional. We are stonewalled many times in our journeys where we come up on change, and it can be a big change of job, change of relationship, that sort of thing, where we stop ourselves and we say, oh no, I can't do that. But the reality is we have to move through that change if we're going to move forward. And so we suffer. So that's why I say change is inevitable. That's the universal constant out there in the universe. As a scientist, the universal constant is things are always changing. And it's how we move through the flow of that is really, really important, being in the flow of that. And whatever doesn't resonate with us, where there's creating friction, that usually means that something that needs to move away from our life and our journey. And it's going to happen multiple times throughout your life. So it's having the courage to go where those questions lead when we're asking ourselves these better questions. So wherever you are in your journey, I invite you to walk this path with me. Not towards becoming a perfect leader, but becoming a more conscious one. Okay? So next podcast will be September 6th, and that's titled The Courage to Climb Higher. And that's going to be directly related to chapter 1 of the book, Climbing the Pine Tree, and you'll understand what that means when I share the story. But it traces the journey from this curious boy, that's me, climbing higher through the scientist and then ultimately towards consciousness, with the leadership lesson that coming from that, which is curiosity is the first act of courage. So next time I'll take you back to the pine tree and the boy that climbed that, and the question I've been asking in one form or another since then. That is, what becomes possible when we are willing to climb beyond what we can already see? That's going to where we'll start in a couple weeks here. All right. So thank you for joining me for this first episode. We're just introducing the subject for season 4, and really super excited about taking you on this journey. I hope you join in. If you missed the live stream broadcast, we will live stream on the 6th. We'll get our technical issues figured out, and then from there we'll move into a bi-weekly cadence to take you on the journey of the conscious leader. Until then, with gratitude, I'm Dr. Bill.